Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 17 of Great Guitar Build Off 2023, and in this episode we're going to be finishing off the tricky job of binding the body wings before starting the even trickier job of binding the headstock. We left last time with this lower wing still encased in blue masking tape and clamped up with all sorts of coils and stuff, trying to keep this binding in place. It's worked actually relatively well. It has glued that binding down okay. It was a lot easier to do than the first one where I used just masking tape, but there are a few problems with it. Most of it is as good as the other one. There are a few little problems and I'll bring you in closer to have a look at those in a second. There is a gap around here on the side where the binding hasn't kind of sat down properly into that binding channel. I'm not particularly worried about it. I've got a really good technique that I know can fix it. But before I do that, I do have a couple of other bits on here and I'll bring you in a bit closer so I can explain what I'm going to do. And there's two little bits on this kind of lower horn area that need repair. First one is right in this corner here. It hasn't stuck at all for probably the first inch and a half maybe even. There's quite a big gap there. So that needs gluing back down. I'll do that with some tight bond. And the second bit is right on the tip of the horn. There's this gap here. And I consider myself quite lucky that I got it to go round here in one piece without any breaking. But obviously I was unable to get enough clamping pressure right on the end of there to make it kind of join up properly. And now that it's all dry, there's just like no realistic way that that is going to move to where we want it. So that's going to need filling. And that's the first bit I'm going to do. And it's a relatively straightforward fix. I've created a bit of wenge dust just by sanding a little piece of spare wood down. And I'm simply going to drop that into that little crack there. And pack it in as well as I can. And just make sure I get rid of any kind of excess off the top of that maple. And then I'm going to take some water thin super glue with one of these little micro applicators and ever so carefully just wick a little bit of that in to that gap. I'm trying really hard to stay off the maple. We'll give that a few seconds to dry up. And there's still a tiny little bit of a gap there. So we'll just give that another go. There's a little bit more glue than I would have liked, but I'm sure it'll be fine. That's pretty dry now. So I'm just going to take a card scraper and very gently I'm going to take that excess glue off. It's quite important that there's not any glue sat on top of the wenge and definitely the maple, because that will show through when you finish it. But that tiny little gap that we've filled probably won't make so much difference that you'd notice it. And I'm very happy with that. I'll bring you in closer and you can have a look yourselves. And there you can see that's the little gap that we've filled. And I think even this close up you're struggling to really see. I'm looking at it in the monitor and it kind of just looks pretty much like the rest of the wood. And if we just put a little bit of moisture on it to simulate what it's going to look like with a bit of finish on, it just blends right in. So that's great. That's one of the repairs affected pretty nicely. So we'll move on to the second one, which is, as we said, this little bit of loose binding there. And I'm simply going to glue that back in place with some tight bond, Should be a very straightforward job. That's usually the precursor to an absolute nightmare, but we shall see. And literally all I'm going to do is just going to open that out. A small tool and use as little glue as I possibly can get away with, but just ensure that I have actually got enough in there to do the job, which hopefully I have. And I've done a practice run on this, so hopefully I know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to take a sash clamp. I'm actually going to clamp it to the workpiece so it can't slip and slide around. I'll put that round dowel in. I'm just going to tighten that clamp up, and hopefully that will do us. Sometimes with these jobs it's not about never going wrong or making a mistake, it's just having a few tricks up your sleeve so you can dig yourself out when you do. This super glue and sawdust trick is really good for kind of oily hardwoods like rosewood, ebony, wenge, stuff like that. Over the years I've picked up quite a lot of these little tricks and tips, and I regularly share them on the channel, so just make sure you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of them. So obviously that needs to dry for an hour or so. So while that's happening, we can get on with what this episode's really supposed to be about, and that's getting the binding onto the headstock. And I think that this could actually be quite a difficult little job that I've got to do here. There are some tight corners on here. There's 3 of them. So I don't think there is any way in the world I'm going to get this to go round in one piece. What I'm thinking at the moment is it's actually 4 pieces. I think we'll get that quite easily, but we're not turning that corner. That will just snap. So then we have to do this section, and then finally these 2 sections here. But to further complicate things, and I think it will help if I put the fretboard back on to demonstrate this, these bits that go around here also need to tie in with the fretboard. So they need to extend kind of past where the nut's going to start. I've got the nut here. So they need to extend past here and kind of meet up with the fretboard at an angle. And all of that kind of makes this quite a little tricky job. But I think I've got my head around it. First thing I'm going to do is I've set up my marking gauge, and I'm going to scribe a 4mm mark all the way around there, because I'm actually going to, and I've already cut my strips, I'm actually going to do the headstock binding at 4mm instead of 6. I just think that will look a little bit neater and a bit nicer with regards to the thickness of the headstock. I think 6 would just look too thick there. So I'm going to scribe my 4mm mark all the way around the headstock. I will then extend what will be straight lines through until it meets the top of the neck, and that will be somewhere beyond where the fretboard starts. Do that on both sides. I can route all the way around the perimeter, and then these little bits I'll just have to do those by hand with a chisel and a scalpel probably, just to cut that out and get where we need to be with it. From there I can then start sticking my 4 sections of binding in. So enough blabbing. First up, we'll get this marked out and start to get the routing and the cutting done. Okay, so that's the channels cut. They've gone very, very nicely. The sharp-eyed amongst you will have noticed that I didn't use my brand new extended oversized base for the router for no other reason than I completely forgot. I won't lie to you. So next up, I'm going to just extend these channels down this tiny little bit. So I've set my marking gauge to 1.5 mil, and as best as I can, I'm going to run a line down there. And I'm just going to join that up with my scalpel. And then we just need to get that tipped on its side. And take that waste out with a chisel. And this is a delicate little job. It's just about kind of prying out a little bit at a time until we get it where we need it. Well, this is ready to go now. It's all masked off. I had a comment about masking for gluing like this, saying that they struggled to get kind of right up to the line and get a clean line. And when they glued their binding on, it was really difficult to get the masking tape off, and you could actually see the masking tape stuck in the join between the binding and the body. The way I do it is I'll put my piece of masking tape over, I'll kind of trim it roughly to shape with a scalpel, and then I'll take some 400 sandpaper, something quite fine, and just go over right on the corner and sand that, and you'll sand through the paper and you'll be able to peel the excess off. So again, it's time for loads and loads of Titebond, yards and yards of blue masking tape, but hopefully we'll be able to get this binding put in place quite nicely. Okay, so that's the first section done. I've had to get creative and use a couple of clamps and a socket just to get the pressure where I need it. Hopefully that's going to work fine, but it does mean that I don't have access to any of the other bits for the time being. So this is going to take at least 3 sessions to get done. I need to wait for this all to dry up before I can get onto any of the others. So we'll leave this for the time being, and we'll pick up with that errant body wing and just do the last of the repairs on there. Okay, so that's out of the clamps. It's gone down really well. It's stuck very nicely. There's almost no residue or anything there, just a tiny little bit. So I'm just going to Look at that quick going over with a card scraper. That's literally all it needed. Quick sand. But the bit we really need to focus on now, and we probably do actually need to focus on it a little bit better than we are doing, is there's a gap. Kind of runs from here down to the end of the horn. And I'm not going to get this off. I could do, but it would mean destroying it, so I'm not going to do that. So again, we need to fill this. So I'm going to get it better set up on the bench so we've got a bit of access to it, and we'll get something in there. You can probably see this gap better now, and it's relatively big. But I think A, because of its positioning, and B, because of the nature of the material we're working with, I do think we can get a decent repair into this. And again, just about getting some Wenge dust into that crack. And then just dropping some super glue in. And again, that will just need a minute or so for that glue to dry up. I'm just going to work this material down now with a card scraper until it's flush, and then we can see whether we've actually filled that gap properly or whether we need to have a second go at it. And I don't think this will take very long at all. Got a nice sharp card scraper, so it is kind of getting through that quite quickly. I think for the most part we got that. There's a little bit of gappage still though, just around here. So again, just going to try and get a bit of dust in there if I can. And once more, just touch it in with a bit of super glue. Now, I've had a few comments since the last episode about how I use and sharpen card scrapers, and I personally think they are a very, very useful tool and well worth getting to know. So if you would like to see a little bit of a demonstration of how I go about sharpening and preparing them, just drop me a comment in this video and I'll see what I can do. That's already dry. And I think now that that's kind of dried and everything, you can't really see it at all. Very easy to mistake that for the figure in the wood. So very happy with that. And the first bit of binding has stuck down really, really nicely onto the headstock as well. So hopefully we can do a little bit of trimming on that and then get on with the next couple of bits. But that's going to be for the next episode. So as always, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking down below, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.